Admiral Krazak's forehands trembled as he sat in the dimly lit room aboard Harmony Point Space Station. His gray skin looked even paler under the soft blue lights. The HFY War general had never felt so nervous. This was the first time any high-ranking official from his species would speak publicly about the war with humans that ended 3 years ago. Across from him, journalist Glixtor adjusted the recording equipment. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Outside the viewport, stars twinkled against the blackness of space. "We can begin whenever you're ready, Admiral," Glixtor said, his voice calm and professional. Krazak's eye stalks twitched. He took a deep breath through his breathing slits. "I am ready." Glixtor nodded and activated the recording device. A small red light blinked on. "Today I speak with Admiral Krazak of the HFY Dominion. He will share his account of the interstellar conflict with humans for the first time. Admiral, thank you for agreeing to this interview." Krazak's mandibles clicked nervously. "It is time the galaxy knows the truth about what happened. Let's start at the beginning. What were the first encounters with humans like?" The Admiral's eyes narrowed as he remembered. "We thought them primitive," he began, his voice growing steadier. "Their ships looked crude to us. Their weapons seemed old and simple. The HFY had conquered 17 species before them with almost no resistance. We expected the same from humans." He shifted in his seat, the memory clearly uncomfortable. "Our intelligence showed their civilization was young. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 decades earlier. Their colonies barely extended beyond their home system. So you were confident when you entered their solar system?" Glixtor asked. "More than confident. We were arrogant," Krazak admitted. "Our fleet appeared near their planet they call Mars. We expected fear, we expected quick surrender, but that didn't happen? No." The Admiral's voice dropped lower. "We met Captain Frank Winters of the human ship Defiance. When our Supreme Commander delivered the standard ultimatum, this human did something none of us understood." "What did he do?" He laughed. Krazak's skin changed color slightly, a sign of discomfort among his species. "He actually laughed during our formal surrender demand. Then he said words I will never forget. 'We don't surrender to bullies. Go home while you still can.'" Glixtor's recording device hummed quietly. "How did your forces respond?" "As protocol dictated. We targeted a small human outpost on Mars. It was to be a simple demonstration of our power. We expected them to beg for mercy after that." The Admiral's eyes looked distant. Instead, they fought back with surprising skill. Krazak leaned forward. "The humans used weapons we didn't expect. Some of their defenses were energy-based, as we anticipated, but they also used old-style ballistic weapons and physical projectiles. Our shields were designed to stop energy attacks, not solid objects moving at high speeds. Was this deliberate on their part?" "Very deliberate. We later learned humans never abandoned older technologies even as they developed new ones. They kept everything that worked." The Admiral's voice held a hint of reluctant admiration. "They had backup systems for their backup systems. When we disabled their communications array, they switched to radio waves. When we jammed those, they used laser signaling. When we blocked that, they used physical message runners." Glixtor seemed surprised. "Message runners? You mean actual living beings carrying information physically?" "Yes. Humans would send people, running or using small vehicles to deliver messages when all electronic methods failed." Krazak shook his head. "Our military doctrine had no protocol for this. We had grown dependent on disrupting enemy communications. Humans simply adapted and kept fighting." "Tell me about the first major battle," Glixtor prompted. Krazak's breathing quickened. "It was at the human outpost they called Armstrong Base. We surrounded it with 12 warships. Their defenses consisted of only 3 small ships and ground-based weapons. We thought it would fall within hours." The Admiral's limbs trembled slightly. The base commander was a human female named Olivia Martinez. She had only 300 fighters. We had over 3,000, but she did something we didn't understand. "What happened?" "She split her forces into tiny groups. They would strike quickly, then disappear into maintenance tunnels or hidden bunkers. They never engaged in direct combat where our superior numbers would win. Instead, they used their knowledge of the terrain to ambush our troops. Krazak's mandibles clicked in agitation. And the noise. Humans made so much noise during battle. They would shout and yell. Some would laugh. Others would sing songs. Our soldiers are trained to fight in disciplined silence, communicating only through secure channels. The human behavior confused and unnerved our forces. Glixtor leaned forward. Was this deliberate psychological warfare? Yes, though we didn't realize it at first. Later, we captured documents showing humans had studied Vexari psychology. They knew our species evolved from herd animals. We find chaotic, unpredictable sounds deeply disturbing. The Admiral's skin darkened. They used this against us. They would play recordings of Earth predators, wolves howling, lions roaring, over speakers during battles. These sounds triggered instinctive fear responses in our troops. How long did Armstrong Base hold out? 12 days. We expected 12 hours. Krazak's voice was quiet. In those 12 days, we lost over 800 soldiers. They lost less than 50. When we finally secured the base, we found it empty. Martinez had evacuated her people through underground tunnels we didn't know existed. The Admiral fell silent for a moment, lost in thought. But the most disturbing thing happened 3 days later. We detected a human fleet approaching. Leading it was a ship called the Relentless, commanded by Captain Frank Winters, the same human who had laughed at our ultimatum. He sent a message to our fleet commander. What did it say? Glixtor asked. He said, "You took one outpost, we have thousands. Each one will cost you more than the last. How many of your people are you willing to lose before you go home?" Krazak's eyes narrowed. Then they attacked, not with the largest ships in their fleet, but with small, fast vessels. They darted between our formations, disrupting our carefully planned defense patterns. They targeted our command ships specifically. The Admiral's voice grew softer. That was when we first heard their battle cry. When Captain Winters gave the order to attack, he said words that would become infamous among our troops. "Let them. Hear you coming." "And then?" Glixtor prompted when the Admiral fell silent. "Then we learned that we had gravely underestimated humanity," Krazak said. "We thought the battle for Armstrong Base was difficult. We had no idea what was coming next." The red light on the recording device continued to blink steadily as Glixtor prepared his next question. Outside the viewport, a small transport ship docked at Harmony Point. Life in the galaxy continued peacefully, a peace bought at a terrible price that Admiral Krazak was only beginning to reveal. The interview room grew quieter as Admiral Krazak's breathing slowed. He seemed lost in thought for a moment before Glixtor's voice brought him back to the present. "You mentioned psychological warfare," the journalist said. "Can you explain more about how humans use this against your forces?" Krazak's eye stalks twitched nervously. The humans employed tactics we had never encountered before. They understood our psychology better than we understood theirs. The Admiral shifted uncomfortably in his seat. There was a human female, Lieutenant Samantha Reeves. She led what they called Ghost Squad. We intercepted communications about this unit, but dismissed them as human exaggeration. What made this Ghost Squad special? Glixtor asked. They specialized in disrupting our hive mind communication, Krazak said. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. Somehow, they discovered that specific sonic frequencies could interfere with our neural patterns. When they broadcast these sounds, our soldiers would experience confusion, disorientation, even panic. The journalist leaned forward. How did the humans discover this weakness? We believe they captured one of our scout ships early in the conflict. They must have studied our biology. The Admiral's skin darkened with emotion. Lieutenant Reeves apparently had training in something humans call xenobiology. She understood how our nervous systems worked and exploited this knowledge. Krazak paused, his four hands clasping and unclasping nervously. The first time they used this tactic was during the Battle of Titan. Our forces outnumbered theirs 3-1. Victory should have been certain. What happened? Ghost Squad infiltrated our communication centers. They planted devices that broadcast these disruptive frequencies. Suddenly, our soldiers could not coordinate. Officers could not give clear orders. Some troops experienced what humans call seizures. The admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly. In the middle of this chaos, human forces attacked. The journalist made notes as Krazak continued. But the sonic disruption was only the beginning. As I mentioned earlier, humans used sound as a weapon in ways we never expected. During the Titan battle, they discovered our sensitivity to certain Earth animal sounds. The admiral's skin paled slightly. They began broadcasting recordings of wolves howling, lions roaring, and other predator sounds over our communication channels. These sounds triggered ancestral fears in our species that we didn't even know we still had. And this was effective? Glixtor asked, clearly surprised. Terrifyingly effective. Our troops reported feeling primal fear unlike anything in our military training. Some refused to advance, others fled their positions. Krazak's voice grew softer. Our military doctrine had no defense against this. We had evolved beyond such basic fears, or so we thought. The journalist adjusted his recording device. You mentioned human battle cries earlier. Can you explain why these affected your forces so deeply? Krazak's breathing quickened. Vexari soldiers fight in disciplined silence. We communicate through secure channels and neural links. Noise during battle indicates lack of discipline, lack of control. And humans were different? Completely different. They shouted while fighting. They made noise deliberately. The admiral seemed disturbed by the memory. Commander Alan Peterson became infamous among our troops. Before the Battle of Europa, he gave an order that spread fear throughout our ranks. He told his soldiers, "Let them hear you coming." Why would this be effective? Glixtor asked. Wouldn't revealing their positions be a disadvantage? That's what we thought at first. We couldn't understand why they would announce their presence. Krazak's eyes narrowed. Then we realized they wanted us to know they were coming. It was a message. We are not afraid of you. The admiral's voice grew tighter. Human soldiers would charge while shouting battle cries. Some would laugh during combat. Others would sing songs, actual songs, while fighting. One human squad was known for singing something called Country Roads as they attacked our positions. How did your troops respond to this behavior? With increasing fear. It was intimidating in ways I cannot adequately express. Krazak's skin color shifted again. Our soldiers began to fear hearing human voices. Some would retreat at the first sound of human shouting. Glixtor made more notes. Were there other psychological tactics that proved effective? Yes. The humans learned to exploit our reliance on technology and precise planning. The admiral's mandibles clicked softly. They would deliberately appear to malfunction or fail, then strike when we lowered our guard. Can you give an example? The Deimos outpost incident. Krazak's breathing grew irregular. Our forces surrounded a human mining facility on Mars's moon. They appeared to lose power. Their lights went out. Communication ceased. We assumed their systems had failed, so we moved in to capture the facility. The admiral paused, gathering himself. It was a trap. The humans, led by Major Steve Harrison, had deliberately shut down their systems. They waited in the darkness. When our troops entered, they attacked using only simple weapons and night vision technology. What was the outcome? We lost 200 soldiers. The humans lost 12. Krazak's voice was barely audible now. After the battle, we intercepted a message from Major Harrison to Earth Command. He said, "The darkness works for us, not them. They fear what they cannot see. We embrace it." The journalist waited a moment before asking his next question. You mentioned that humans would sometimes laugh during battle. Why was this particularly disturbing to your forces? In Vexari culture, laughter is reserved for moments of joy, usually shared with family. It has no place in battle. The admiral's eye stalks drooped slightly. To hear humans laugh while fighting, while killing, it suggested something our psychologists couldn't explain. Were they enjoying the battle? Were they mocking us? Or were they simply unafraid of death? What conclusion did your military reach? That humans process fear differently than any species we had encountered. When faced with danger, they don't always flee or freeze. Sometimes they become more aggressive. Sometimes they find humor in terrible situations. Krazak shook his head, slowly. One of our intelligence officers described it as weaponized emotional resilience. Glixtor considered this. Did you develop countermeasures against these psychological tactics? We tried. We created sound-dampening fields for our troops. We trained them to ignore human battle cries. We developed new communication systems that were harder to disrupt. The Admiral's voice grew firmer. But the humans kept adapting. When one tactic stopped working, they tried another. It sounds like they studied your responses carefully, the journalist observed. They did. And that was perhaps the most unnerving discovery of all. Krazak looked directly at Glixtor. They were learning from us while fighting us. Every encounter, every battle, they gathered more information about our weaknesses. Outside the viewport, a small maintenance drone floated. Us. The Admiral watched it for a moment, gathering his thoughts. But psychological warfare was only the beginning, Krazak said finally. What truly broke our military was the human capacity for adaptation and improvisation. No matter what advantage we had, they found ways to counter it, often using methods we could never have predicted. Glixtor leaned forward. Perhaps we should discuss these adaptive tactics next? Admiral Krazak nodded slowly, his eye stalks drooping with fatigue. Yes, but I may need a brief rest first. The memories, they are not easy to revisit. The journalist nodded and deactivated his recording device. The red light blinked off, leaving the room in deeper shadow. What the Admiral would reveal next would prove even more disturbing than what he had shared so far. After a short break, Admiral Krazak and Glixtor resumed the interview. The journalist activated his recording device again, and the small red light blinked back to life. We were discussing human adaptability, Glixtor said. You mentioned this was particularly troubling for your forces. Admiral Krazak's limbs trembled slightly as he nodded. Our military doctrine relied on precise planning and perfect execution, he explained. We trained our soldiers to follow orders exactly. We developed detailed battle plans that accounted for every possibility, or so we thought. And the humans were different? Completely different. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. The Battle of Europa showed us just how different. We had disabled their primary weapons on the moon base. According to our doctrine, they should have surrendered or retreated. But they didn't? No. Their chief engineer, a human female named Olivia Martinez, did something we couldn't predict. Krazak's voice held a note of reluctant admiration. She converted mining equipment into makeshift weapons. Within hours, they had created what humans call railguns from machinery meant to break ice. The journalist looked surprised. Is such improvisation common among humans? Disturbingly common. In fact, they train for it. The Admiral leaned forward. Later, we captured training, documents from their military. They actually practiced something called MacGyvering, creating tools and weapons from ordinary objects. MacGyvering, named after a human from their entertainment media, apparently. Krazak waved a hand dismissively. The point is, they expect things to go wrong. They prepare for failure. This is completely opposite to Vexari military thinking, where failure is not an option. Glixtor made notes as the Admiral continued. Then there was Colonel William Gardner and his infamous switchback protocol. Krazak's mandibles clicked rapidly. His tactics confounded our strategists. His forces would appear to abandon important positions, drawing us in. Then we would discover the areas were rigged with traps. What kind of traps? Simple but effective ones. Tripwires connected to explosives. Pressure plates that triggered ceiling collapses. Once they flooded an entire section with water, then electrified it when our troops entered. The Admiral's skin darkened. They used our own tendency to follow standard occupation procedures against us. How so? We always secure abandoned enemy positions in the same way. Our troops follow specific patterns of movement. Gardner studied these patterns and designed his traps accordingly. Krazak's breathing quickened. After several disasters, our commanders became hesitant to occupy human positions even when they appeared empty. This gave humans time to regroup and counterattack. The journalist leaned forward. You mentioned earlier that humans received unusual orders. Can you explain? Yes, this was perhaps their most disturbing advantage. The Admiral's eye stalks twitched. Vexari soldiers receive detailed instructions. They are expected to follow these exactly. If conditions change, they must wait for new orders. And human soldiers? They received what they called mission-type orders. They were given objectives but allowed to determine how to accomplish them independently. Krazak's voice held disbelief even now. A Vexari soldier without direct commands is paralyzed. Human soldiers without direct commands became more dangerous, not less. Can you give an example? The Ganymede incident. The Admiral grew quieter. Major Nicole Garcia's division was cut off behind our lines when we destroyed their supply ship. According to our intelligence, they had supplies for only 2 weeks. We expected them to surrender when they ran out of food and ammunition. They didn't surrender? They survived for 3 months. Krazak's voice rose slightly. They scavenged parts from their damaged vehicles to build shelters. They repurposed communication equipment to create makeshift weapons. They even found ways to grow simple plants for food in that hostile environment. The journalist made more notes. How did your forces respond to this? We sent more troops to hunt them down. We lost more soldiers trying to eliminate Garcia's division than in direct confrontations with Earth's main fleet. The Admiral's skin paled at the memory. Her soldiers kept changing their tactics, adapting their weapons to use local resources. When we thought we had them cornered, they would disappear into tunnel systems they had discovered or created. It sounds like individual initiative was important to human military success, critically important, and completely foreign to our way of fighting. Krazak clasped his hands tightly. Our soldiers are strongest when working as a perfectly coordinated unit. Human soldiers seemed strongest when forced to think for themselves. Glixtor considered this. Was there a particular battle that demonstrated this difference most clearly? The Callisto space station siege. The Admiral's breathing became irregular. A human commander named Jack Powell was in charge of their forces there. We damaged the station's central communication system in our first attack. This should have left their defenders in chaos. What happened instead? Powell had trained his people to operate independently if communications failed. Each small unit continued fighting according to the overall mission objectives, without needing constant orders. Krazak shook his head slowly. Our forces, by contrast, became confused when they couldn't receive consistent instructions from their commanders. The journalist adjusted his recording device. This adaptability extended to their weapons as well? Yes. Humans never relied on a single weapon system. They maintained old technologies alongside new ones. The Admiral gestured with one hand. For example, they still used chemical propellant weapons, guns, even though they had developed energy weapons. When our shields adapted to stop their energy beams, they simply switched to bullets. Was this deliberate strategy? Very deliberate. They called it tactical diversity. They intentionally used multiple types of weapons so we couldn't defend against all of them at once. Krazak's mandibles clicked. Most advanced species discard older technologies when newer ones are developed. Humans kept everything that still worked. Including their thinking? Exactly. They combined modern tactical theories with ancient warfare concepts. One human commander, Richard Bryant, actually studied something called Viking berserkers from Earth's history. He trained his soldiers to fight with controlled fury that terrified our troops. Glixtor looked thoughtful. It seems humans draw strength from their past as well as their present. They do, and they improvise constantly. The Admiral's voice grew softer. During the Battle of Phobos, a human squad was pinned down by our forces. They were out of ammunition for their main weapons. Do you know what they did? What? They made explosives from mining chemicals they found in a nearby storage room. They created distraction devices from communication equipment. Their squad leader, Sergeant Paul Wilson, even used his personal music device to broadcast confusing signals that disrupted our targeting systems. The Admiral fell silent for a moment, lost in the memory. The most disturbing thing was how quickly they adapted. In the time it took our commanders to request new orders from the fleet, Human soldiers had already changed their approach 3 times. They operated on what they called real-time adaptation. Outside the viewport, a large transport ship slowly moved past the station. Admiral Krazak watched it with distant eyes before continuing. But perhaps the most frightening aspect of human adaptability was not their technology or tactics, he said finally. It was their willingness to endure suffering and make sacrifices that no Vexari would consider reasonable. Glixtor leaned forward. Perhaps we should discuss that next. The Admiral nodded slowly. Yes, their capacity for endurance and sacrifice was what ultimately convinced our high command that this was a war we could not win, at least not at a cost we were willing to pay. The red recording light continued to blink steadily as the interview prepared to enter its next phase. What the Admiral would reveal about human endurance would prove even more disturbing than what he had shared so far. The atmosphere in the interview room grew heavier as Admiral Krazak prepared to discuss what was clearly the most difficult subject for him. Glixtor adjusted his recording device and waited patiently. We believed our technological superiority would eventually prevail, the Admiral began after a long pause. What we failed to account for was human willingness to endure suffering. How did this manifest in battle? Glixtor asked quietly. The siege of Callisto Base was my first real understanding of this trait. Krazak's eyes seemed to look beyond the room, back into memories he had tried to forget. 300 human defenders under Captain Gregory Howard held out against 7,000 of our troops for 72 Earth days. The journalist's eyes widened. Such a small force against so many? Yes. The humans were completely outgunned and outnumbered. The Admiral's voice grew strained. They had limited supplies. Their oxygen recyclers began failing after the first month. Their food ran low. By all logical calculations, they should have surrendered. But they didn't. No. They rationed everything. They fixed their recyclers with parts from non-essential systems. When their food supplies dwindled, they reduced portions to the minimum needed to survive. Krazak's mandibles clicked softly. Our commanders kept expecting them to give up. Every day we offered terms of surrender. Every day Captain Howard sent back the same message. We can do this all day. Glixtor made notes. Was this typical of human resistance? Disturbingly so. We encountered it everywhere. The Admiral's skin darkened with emotion. On the Mars colony, we cut off water supplies to a settlement, thinking they would surrender within days. Instead, they created a water recycling system that allowed them to survive for weeks. They collected and purified their own bodily fluids, rather than surrender. The journalist looked shocked. That seems extreme. To us, yes. To humans, it was simply necessary. Krazak shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Our species evolved on a world with plentiful resources. Suffering through extreme deprivation is not something we understand well. Humans seem to have a long evolutionary history of enduring harsh conditions. Were there other examples that particularly struck you? The Admiral's breathing became irregular. The solar gambit. It still disturbs me deeply to think about it. What happened? Lieutenant Commander Lisa Ortiz commanded a small human vessel called the Sunseeker. Her ship was damaged in battle and pursued by 3 of our cruisers. Krazak's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. She deliberately flew her damaged vessel into a solar flare. Why would she do that? The radiation burst disabled our pursuing ship's shields and navigation systems. It allowed other human vessels to escape. The Admiral's eyes closed briefly, but Ortiz and her crew took lethal radiation doses in the process. They knew they would die, yet they executed the maneuver without hesitation. Glixtor was silent for a moment. They sacrificed themselves intentionally? Yes. And this was not an isolated incident. Krazak's skin paled. We could not comprehend why beings with such short natural lifespans would sacrifice themselves so readily. In our culture, preservation of life is paramount. Our soldiers are valuable resources to be preserved. Humans seem to view their individual lives as tools to be used, even expended, for their collective survival. The journalist adjusted his recording device. This must have made conventional warfare difficult. Impossible. How do you fight an enemy who is not afraid to die? The Admiral's limbs trembled slightly. We kept expecting to break their will through attrition. Instead, each loss seemed to strengthen their resolve. Was there a specific incident that demonstrated this most clearly? Yes. When we captured a human science vessel near Jupiter. Krazak's breathing quickened. It contained valuable research data. Our boarding party secured the ship and prepared to take the crew prisoner. The lead scientist, Dr. Joseph Campbell, activated the ship's experimental matter-antimatter drive. What happened? He destroyed his vessel and 3 of our cruisers. The Admiral's voice was barely audible. He left only a brief message to his command. We die free. The interview room fell silent except for the soft hum of the station's systems. Glixtor waited for Krazak to continue. After that incident, our high command ordered a complete psychological review of human behavior, the Admiral finally said. Our xenopsychologists concluded that humans have an unusual relationship with death. They fear it, yes, but they fear certain other things more: subjugation, loss of autonomy, the defeat of their group. How did this affect your military strategy? It invalidated it entirely. Krazak seemed defeated even now, years later. Our strategies relied on enemies making rational choices to preserve their lives. Humans made rational choices, but with completely different values. They considered certain principles worth dying for. The journalist made more notes. You mentioned that humans valued their collective survival above individual lives. Can you elaborate? They have a concept called sacrifice for the greater good. Their military training emphasizes this idea. The Admiral's mandibles clicked rapidly. During the Battle of Neptune's Moons, Commander Ben Lewis ordered his ship to shield a civilian transport. His vessel was destroyed, but the transport escaped. His last message to the civilians was, "Live well, make it count." Glixtor shook his head in wonder. Did your forces ever adapt to these human tendencies? We tried. We revised our battle doctrines. We trained our soldiers to expect human self-sacrifice. Krazak's voice grew stronger. But there was a fundamental problem. We could understand human behavior intellectually, but we could not replicate it. Our soldiers could not be asked to make the same sacrifices human soldiers made willingly. Give me an example. When we captured a critical communications relay, near Earth, we assigned 3,000 troops to defend it. We knew humans would try to recapture it. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Major Keith Rivera led just 400 human soldiers in the counterattack. Our commanders calculated that they could not possibly succeed with such a small force. What happened? Rivera divided his forces into small teams. Each team had a specific objective. Many were suicide missions. Krazak's skin darkened again. One by one, these teams sacrificed themselves to disable our defenses, create distractions, or open paths for the others. In the end, 53 humans survived and recaptured the relay. Our commanders could not believe the report. Outside the viewport, the stars seemed dimmer now, as if respecting the gravity of the Admiral's words. Then there was the most troubling incident of all, Krazak said quietly. During the final year of the war, we captured a human officer, Captain Sarah Johnson. Our intelligence officers questioned her about Earth's defense plans. Did she reveal anything? Nothing. Despite severe methods. The Admiral seemed ashamed. When asked why she would endure such suffering rather than provide simple information that might save her life, she said something our translators struggled with. The closest meaning was, "Some things are worth more than my life." Glixtor leaned forward. This concept was truly alien to your people? Not completely alien. We understand sacrifice for family, but sacrifice for abstract principles? For people you have never met? This was difficult to comprehend. Krazak's eyes looked directly at the journalist. It made humans uniquely dangerous as opponents. How do you defeat an enemy who is prepared to sacrifice everything? The red recording light blinked steadily as the interview approached its final segment. What the Admiral would reveal next would explain why the mighty Vexari Dominion conqueror of 17 species, ultimately sought peace with humanity. As the interview entered its final segment, Admiral Krazak seemed both exhausted and relieved, as if sharing these memories was both painful and necessary. Glixtor sensed they were approaching the most important part of the conversation. We've discussed human psychological warfare, adaptability, and their capacity for sacrifice, the journalist said. But what ultimately led the Vexari Dominion to seek peace? Was there a final breaking point? The Admiral's 4 hands lay still on his lap as he gathered his thoughts. It wasn't a single battle that defeated us, he admitted after a long pause. It was the realization that humans would never stop. Never. Please explain, Glixtor encouraged gently. After 3 years of fighting, our military analysts made a disturbing discovery. Krazak's voice grew steadier as he spoke. Despite heavy losses, human fighting effectiveness was not decreasing. In fact, it was increasing. They were learning from every engagement, adapting their tactics, becoming more dangerous. So their losses didn't weaken them. Not in the way we expected. When we captured Earth's outer colonies, we thought it would demoralize them. The Admiral shook his head slowly. Instead, it only intensified their resolve. General Susan Blake led what they called the Kuiper Belt counteroffensive. Her forces recaptured 3 major outposts despite being outnumbered. What made this counteroffensive special? The morale of her troops. That was humanity's ultimate weapon, their inexplicable ability to maintain hope and determination despite overwhelming odds. Krazak's mandibles clicked softly. Our intelligence intercepted a transmission from Admiral Daniel Carter to Earth Command during this period. He said simply, "We will pay any price, we will bear any burden." The Admiral's eye stalks drooped slightly. Our Supreme Command realized then that this species would fight to the last individual if necessary. Our casualties were mounting, and we began to question if victory was possible at any cost we could accept. Glixtor made notes. Was there a particular battle or incident that convinced your leadership that peace was necessary? The deployment of what humans called Lazarus protocols. Krazak's skin paled at the memory. Commander Patricia Vasquez pioneered this approach. Her forces would engage in what appeared to be suicidal attacks against our superior positions. That doesn't sound unusual based on what you've described before. The difference was in what came after. The Admiral leaned forward. These weren't simply sacrifice missions. They were deliberate information-gathering operations. Vasquez would sacrifice her front lines to collect tactical data about our defenses and responses. The survivors would retreat, rapidly adjust their strategy based on what they learned, and immediately counterattack. They treated defeat as merely informational, Krazak continued, visibly disturbed. They learned from each loss faster than we could press our advantage. By the time we understood what was happening, they had perfected their approach to neutralize our strengths. The journalist looked surprised. This was a formal strategy? Yes. We later learned it was named after a human religious figure who returned from death. The Admiral's breathing quickened. The psychological effect on our troops was devastating. Our soldiers began to fear that killing humans only made the survivors more dangerous. Were there other factors that influenced the decision to seek peace? The escalation of human tactics. Krazak's voice dropped lower. In the final months of the war, they began deploying what they called planet crackers, weapons capable of rendering entire worlds uninhabitable. Not to use them, but to demonstrate they were willing to use them if necessary. Glixtor's eyes widened. Did they actually use such weapons? Only once, on an uninhabited moon in the Kuiper Belt. They gave us 24 hours' notice to observe from a safe distance. The Admiral's skin darkened. The demonstration was convincing. Our leadership realized that if humans were willing to destroy resources rather than let us have them, the cost of victory would be too high. The journalist made more notes. So the decision to seek peace was pragmatic rather than driven by a specific defeat? Essentially, yes. Our military analyst projected that continuing the war would cost us at least 30% of our total forces, with no guarantee of victory. Krazak clasped his hands together. The turning point came when our Supreme Commander asked a simple question. What if we win? What then? What do you mean? Even if we eventually conquered Earth and its colonies, we would face an occupation nightmare. Based on human behavior in defeated territories, they would never truly submit. We would face endless resistance, sabotage, and insurgency. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Our victory would be hollow, our losses catastrophic. Glixtor nodded slowly. So the peace agreement was the logical choice. Yes, though many in our military considered it a humiliation. Krazak's voice carried a hint of bitterness. We had never before failed to conquer a species we targeted. Some argued we should continue fighting regardless of cost. What convinced them otherwise? A final transmission we intercepted from a human commander to her troops before a major battle. Commander Karen Mitchell told her soldiers, "They think we fight because we believe we can win. The truth is, we fight because we cannot accept losing. There is no version of this story where humanity surrenders, no matter what happens next." The Admiral fell silent for a moment. Our psychologist analyzed those words for days. They concluded she was telling the absolute truth. There was simply no scenario where humans would accept defeat as permanent. Outside the viewport, a small diplomatic vessel with both human and Vexari markings glided past, a visible symbol of the peace that now existed between the species. In our language, we now have a new term, Krazak said, his voice growing stronger. It is a compound word that translates roughly to fighting like humans. It is used to describe a battle that cannot be won through conventional means, one that will consume everything before it ends. Do you believe the peace will last? Glixtor asked. I hope so, for everyone's sake. The Admiral's eyes met the journalist's directly. Humans appeared docile and even friendly in peacetime. Their diplomatic representatives have been respectful and fair. Their merchants trade honestly with us. But we know what lies beneath that civilized exterior. And what is that? An unyielding will that we had never encountered before. A species that does not accept defeat as final. Krazak's mandibles clicked one final time. The Dominion's official position is that continued peace with humans must be our highest priority. As Glixtor prepared to conclude the interview, the Admiral added one final thought. I have observed human children playing games. Even in these simple activities, when they fall down, they get up again. When they lose, they want to play again. They are taught from infancy never to give up. This is not a military trait. It is embedded in their very nature. The journalist nodded as he deactivated his recording device. The red light blinked off. Thank you for sharing your experiences, Admiral, Glixtor said. This interview will help many species understand the importance of maintaining peaceful relations with humans. Admiral Krazak rose from his seat, his posture straighter than when the interview began, as if unburdened by finally sharing the truth. I pray no species ever faces what we faced, he said quietly. The galaxy is fortunate that humans seem to prefer peace, but let no one mistake their preference for peace as an inability to wage war. They are the most formidable opponents the Dominion has ever encountered, and I hope we never forget that fact. As the Admiral departed the interview room, the stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter against the darkness of space, a universe where humans and Vexari now moved forward in an uneasy but enduring peace.